بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Inshallah, I hope you guys are having a good morning. Thought I would try to get back on the habit of doing some regular reflections. And a short while back, I talked about actually, I think it was last Friday in the khutbah. I had talked about, what is why is Ramadan such a harvest for us, right? Why is Ramadan a month that is replete with so many blessings, right? And we tend to feel such elation, right, during the month. Why is that? And, how might we go back to, having some of those feelings and that connection and all that, right, in the months outside of Ramadan? And one of those is I've noticed a tendency in our community, or at least our community seems to almost express a kind of communal depression, right? And there are definitely theories within the field of psychology. There are fields within the field of psychology that talk about not only depression in the individual, but also depressed communities. And I feel that our community right now might indeed, right, it might be exhibiting some of those qualities. And so how can we talk about it? And what can we do, inshallah, to treat those symptoms? And so there is a thing that, at least in the study of psychology, that I guess you could say one of the key words that they talk about is something that's called emotion regulation. It is important to the health of the human being to regulate their emotions. And that is also that they want to be able to experience the full breadth of human emotion in a way that is not disruptive overall to the quality of life. That can be being able to experience happiness without to the point that one goes to self-destructive behavior. And likewise, that a person doesn't suffer from things like, say, grief or sadness, right, to the point where, again, they become a destructive quality. And so as we talk about a deficit in emotion regulation in our community, we need to look at, what are the qualities that a believer is supposed to have? And so if we look, for instance, there's a passage in the 5th chapter of the Quran in Surah Al-Ma'idah. And in this chapter, Allah talks about the believers in a certain quality, and also talks about them in an emotional capacity about what? His love for them and their love for him. So the verse opens up addressing the believers. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. Right? Men yartadda, right? For the one who would leave their religion, men yartadda minkum an dinihi, the one who would turn his back on their religion from amongst you, right? فَسَوْفَ يَأْتِي اللَّهُ بِقَوْمٍ يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهُ. That if in doing so you will only bring harm to yourself, you will not afflict Allah, and that also you will not bring about any good. In fact, what? Allah will simply replace you with another people. And the quality that they will have is that, first off, right, that Allah will love them, right? And so if we're going to deal with, just like in an individual case of depression, that can stem from a lack of a person feeling loved. It may not be that they're not loved. In fact, many people who suffer from depression are indeed loved by many other people around them, by their spouses, their children, their friends, their family, and yet they are not able to perceive. They're not able to perceive that, right? And so where and how can we develop a sense of, how to put it, emotional security, or where are we going to plant the stakes of our emotional wellness? We often try to put it in other areas. One that doesn't get discussed a lot is trying to firmly ensconce or plant our emotional well-being in trying to acquire what? Allah's love. And so the first quality that those believers that Allah will bring about is that what? Number one, He loves them. Secondly, yuhibbunahu. Then Allah talks about what? And they will in turn love Allah. But also, they have a quality that they share amongst each other. And this is what I'm going to try to highlight a little bit today. And so the quality that they share with each other is that they are what? أَذِلَّةٍ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. The second quality is what also وَعِزَّةٍ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. But let's go to the first one, right? That they will be أَذِلَّةٍ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. They will have a gentle, caring, easygoing, kind comportment with their fellow believers. And so if we want to talk about the sort of emotional deficiency in our community, if we want to talk about communal depression, some of this is indeed, it has manifested through our self-imposed isolation from the community. Increasingly, Muslims do not attend masajid. They do not attend the masjid on a regular basis. They do not attend or engage in any kind of ongoing study of their religion. And so it tends to get reduced to maybe a kind of cultural affiliation or an occasional social activity. And this is quite often very insufficient to provide the necessary nutrients for the soul, so to speak. And so one of the secrets of, again, why Ramadan feels so great, why we feel an uptick in our iman, is also because generally we are probably being more social as Muslims. Right? We tend to be more social as Muslims, and we come together. There is a kind of, to paraphrase, right, a kind of magic that happens when we associate more. And it is a disturbing trend that Muslims more and more frequently talk about how they don't go or they don't associate with Muslims. And so I find this not only a blameworthy attitude, but it is also, we need to peel back the layers and examine this. And so I was talking with a friend of mine on the phone this morning, and I said, I do find it curious that I know Muslims that will go to a job that their boss is a jerk, their coworkers get on their nerves, the commute is awful, but they will go to that job 5, 10, 20, 30 years, and they will put up with all of those things in their job because, right, what? You get a paycheck. Right? There is no sense of having any adillah, right, with the Muslims, but you will have adillah with everything else, right? You will have a kind of kindness, right? You will have a kind of kindness with non-Muslims, and you will be very forbearing of the faults of Muslims, but there's very little forbearance on the faults. You'll be very forbearing with non-Muslims, but there's almost no forbearance when it comes to the faults of the Muslims. And so I know I've heard many Muslims say, I don't go to this masjid because they're racist. I think, obviously nobody wants to excuse legitimate racist behavior. We do have to distinguish between people's personal cultural affinities, right? And those things can take time to develop over time. After all, the Prophet ﷺ, when the Ansar and the Muhajirun and the different people came together, he had to take a very active hand in developing that community and bringing people and pairing them together. It just didn't simply happen by osmosis, right? It was something that needed and required direction. And that is never going to happen if we just continue to impose an isolation upon ourselves. Two, we will ourselves continue to degrade in terms of our practice, our iman, our conviction will all suffer enormously if we are not, rubbing up against and, bumping shoulders and rubbing elbows right with those who share our general same beliefs and values, that at some point we are naturally going to gravitate to whoever we're going to be spending the majority of our time with. And so, the verse opens up with what? Men yartadda minkum an dinihi. Well, for those of you that would, well, how is that going to happen? When I look at our community, yes, undoubtedly COVID has been a factor that has played a role in that. But this attitude cannot be completely laying at the feet of COVID. In fact, this attitude has been prevalent, far preceding COVID. And so I think we have to look at why are we not feeling good about ourselves, right? And so to maybe make this video as a little bit more short as possible and to focus on maybe one or 2 points is that one, what is fueling this self-imposed isolation? In the same way that a person could be depressed and they want to just sit in the room all day, they don't want to leave the house, they don't want to socialize. What is fueling that? And so that requires some introspection, for us to think about. And in that, we have to understand that the more that we isolate ourselves, the more that we are likely to continue to feel, right, depressed. And that's why, again, Ramadan is this great breath of, fresh air for us. And so a lot of times, as I said in the khutbah last Friday, we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, right? But we do have to try our best to recreate some of those same circumstances that help to develop success, right? And so where is that? In the same way that a person doesn't want to leave the house or they don't want to go out, where does that idea come? It comes from, obviously, a self-esteem issue, partly, a lack of feeling value in oneself. And so I see our community is suffering definitely from self-esteem value. And this also, I think this is emblematic of why we've seen an increasing tendency over the last, let's just say, 2 or 3 decades, where the kind of communal discussion amongst us, we find Muslims no longer even like to invoke the K word, the kafir word, right? We don't like to say that there are those who are kafir and those who are Muslim. There are those who are kafir and those who are mu'min. We see that Muslims will want to pray for the deceased of non-Muslims, right? Where's all of this coming from, right? We can put aside for a moment the I don't want to say the technical, but in some way the technical religious rulings of why those things, but where is the impetus for that coming from? Some of that is coming from a lack of feeling enough value in oneself that those things are not necessary. And so it when, at least in my purview, when I see, every time there's some celebrity death or, whatever that it is, and the Muslims want to, make dua for this or that, non-Muslim that died, in my estimation, this is partly a kind of vicariousness of trying to find value in oneself through almost like one's tormentor. Now, I'm not saying that non-Muslims are, in general, the tormentors of Muslims, but in the same way that a person who has sometimes suffered abuse at the hands of somebody will quite often and quite tragically attempt to seek value and validation through that very same person or through a figure very much like them. And so we don't seem to take a lot of value out of being Muslim and from other Muslims, but what increasingly we tend to have a kind of vicariousness where we are seeking affirmation and value from those who are not us. And tragically, it doesn't seem to, and just like with a person that wants to seek validation or value from a person that has abused them, you cannot get it. And so likewise for us. And so that's why we're not really finding that through these, misguided attempts, they're not actually really producing any results for us, right? And that's why every year, the one little kind of flu shot in the arm that some of us get is indeed the month of Ramadan. Why? Because we return to a process of seeking to get value from our religion itself, from being around other Muslims, and from Islam as an entirety, right? That's a very different process, again, of a person trying to attain or achieve value outside of themselves, and not even in the way of always a tormentor, right? In a similar way, part of the struggle of Black Americans to overcome some of their existential issues, whether that be the issue of poverty, whether that be the issue of education, right? Yes, undoubtedly white supremacy has played a role in history of impeding Black life, of achieving success. But committed with that, even when, say, the more substantial parts of white supremacy have receded more to the background, right? What remains is the psychological aspect of it, of what needing to validate oneself as a Black person through white frameworks, be that complexion, hair type, genealogy, all those things, right? And that, and so trying to achieve and find value in oneself through that, even though whites may no longer be actively imposing this upon you, right? In the same way, it's just because it's ultimately not a wellspring from which you will be able to draw value and sustenance, right? So it's not always a tormentor. And that's what I mean about the relation between the Muslim and the non-Muslim, particularly in a social setting in which they're far outnumbered, far greater in number. There are far more non-Muslim than Muslims, right? The tendency to want to seek value and affirmation through that, beyond simply being perhaps religiously incorrect, it is also from a pragmatic point of view, ineffective. And so if we return to, again, those things we found in the month of Ramadan that are giving us success, the fasting, the increase in the prayer, the increase in the reading of the Book of Allah, the increase in the reflection of the Book of Allah, the increase of communal participation, we will see, inshallah, that we can achieve those similar successes again. So just putting that out there for us to consider. And lastly, if we are going to try to make that effort, we have to put aside looking for perfection in Muslims versus seeking to perfect our practice and participation of Islam and in the Muslim community. Because what happens is we say, well, I don't go to the masjid because, the Arabs are racist, the Desis are racist, the Black people are racist, whatever that it is, right? Whatever our excuse is. Part of that is that we have set up, and again, this is not to excuse legitimately reprehensible behavior, right? But that has to be compartmentalized and processed and dealt with in a certain way that doesn't lead to what? Communal depression, through lack of communal participation. And so sometimes we do get very disappointed when our fellow brothers and sisters sometimes don't act or behave in a way that we think is behooving of a Muslim. And so what we have done is we have erected a very high bar to jump over. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have expectations of comportment, of behavior, of adab. That's very true, right? And we should hold people accountable to that. But we should be careful in how we formulate that and exactly where is that held. If it's like so deeply seated in the heart that when we experience a disappointment in that area, we are not able to isolate that, but rather it brings everything down, right? It's kind of like you could think of your immune system. You want to build your immune system to have some resiliency so that even in the case that, in the inevitability that you do get sick or you do catch a cold, right, you're able to essentially weather that, push through that, and stay resilient and functional versus being completely incapacitated. And so part of it is to attenuate our expectations of Muslims. I'm not saying we should do away with any expectations, but we should attenuate those and instead seek to perfect our own practice and participation. And perhaps in doing so, perhaps some things will happen and we will, over also the long haul, we will see certain behaviors eventually that will fall off. But at the same time, even at the time of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, right, there were certainly incidents of racism, at least what we could call it today, tribalism, racism, colorism, between some of the companions. So even in his time, right? But what was it allowed them to overcome their human frailties, their inadequacies, their mistakes? It was what? An unwavering commitment to their Lord, to Allah Ta'ala, and to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and to each other, right? And so if we would like to, instead of just simply invoking those stories, but if we would like to truthfully embody them, then we need to have the same courage that those early communities had, that the companions radiallahu anhum ajma'in had, which was to have a spirit of, you know what, I go to the masjid first and foremost because it's pleasing to Allah. وأنا أريد أن من الذين أنا أريد أن أكون من الذين يحبهم ويحبونه. Because I go there because I want to be amongst those that Allah loves and He will love them. That is first and foremost, above anything and anything else. And so that no matter what happens, if I happen to experience some knuckleheadedry at the masjid, that will not debar or it will not persuade me to leave that off. And that perhaps over time, either that kind of person may change and see the error of their ways, or that behavior may fall off, right? And that at the end of the day, I'm going to be feeding my soul what it needs, which is the participation in this community, seeking my value and validation through my religion, through my Lord, through my Prophet, and through my fellow brothers and sisters, and not attempting to get it vicariously through those that do not share my values. So a little food for thought again. You can look it up again, Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th chapter of the Quran. I believe it's the 54th verse, inshallah. So, جزاكم الله خيرا وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. I got to get ready for the day here, but inshallah we will see you later on. Assalamu alaikum.